Tell me a bit about yourself. How many people are in your family? What are some hobbies you have? What are the extracurriculars that you enjoy? Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. I hope the GAT went well. From what I heard, people said they generally enjoyed it, which is a good thing. The GAT is a bit of a taster exam before the actual exam season comes on. For those of you who are new here, my name is Darren. I'm a second year med student studying at Monash University here in Melbourne, Australia. With VCE, I graduated in 2020 with an ATAR of 99.95, and with languages, I scored a 45 in Chinese second language in year 11 and a 45 in Latin in year 12. Latin didn't have an oral component, so Chinese is really where I honed and prepared my oral. I've always been an avid public speaker as well. I won public speaking in year 7, maybe 8, 9 and definitely 12. I think year 9 as well, but definitely year 12. I remember winning public speaking, and I feel like those public speaking skills that are accumulated throughout primary school and high school really helped me for the oral as well. So the oral exam is definitely looming. I know it's a very intimidating aspect for a lot of people because this might be a year 11, 3, 4, and it's the first kind of VCE exam you've ever sat apart from the GAT. Or in year 12, this sort of indicates the start of your actual subject exam season as well. It's also one of the only times you'll be face to face with a VCAA examiner, and any time you're sort of in this situation where you don't have full control because you don't really know exactly what questions the person's going to ask, it can be quite intimidating. I completely understand that. I've sat in the student spot, and so in today's video, I really wanted to share with you guys the 4 main pillars I would suggest so that you can be extremely well prepared for that language oral exam. As I mentioned, I feel that there are 4 main pillars to really excelling in your oral exam. And the first of these pillars is to actually memorize your answers. Seems pretty obvious, right? So there are definitely a list of common questions out there. Your teacher has likely given them to you, and you can probably come up with them yourself as well. These include introduce yourself, introduce your family, your school, your extracurriculars, your hobbies. And for your detailed study, like the picture aspect, you can probably guess, and you and your teacher probably brainstormed the really common questions as well. Definitely memorize the answers to these questions. They're called common questions for a reason. They have a very high likelihood of cropping up in your exam. And also they are kind of like fundamental questions that the examiner uses to kind of feel you out and see, how well prepared is this person? Do I need to extend them with more questions? And it kind of acts as a first impression as well. So you really want to make sure these fundamental questions that are likely to be asked to a number of different exam and different students, you've really prepared well in this aspect. I remember going into my language exam when I was literally sitting outside waiting to be called in. In my head, I was going over my answer for introducing yourself and introducing your family because I had a really strong feeling those were going to be the opening questions. And lo and behold, I went in and the first question they asked me was to introduce myself. So that really goes to show that the importance and also confidence you can have in preparing in these common questions because they will definitely crop up in your exam. One thing to note is that you don't need to have your answers separate from one another. What I mean by this is introducing yourself. You can take aspects of the answer for your hobbies, for your extracurriculars, for your school, for your family. You can incorporate other answers into your introducing yourself answer. Each question is not like a separate answer. You kind of want these to be linked when they need to be linked, when it's natural to do so. In that way, you kind of save time as well. The examiner doesn't need to pull out every little bit of information from you. You offer it freely. Also, it makes it more efficient as well because you can have a lot more information in introducing yourself and you can showcase more of your personality, who you are, and just more of your language and ability as well. Now, you might be asking, Darren, how many questions should I memorize? Where should I stop? If you've memorized the common questions, I think you're very, very well prepared. And obviously there are going to be questions that you can kind of guess the examiner will ask you as well. So for example, if you talked about you liking piano, they might ask you who's your favorite pianist or what are some piano pieces you like. You can kind of anticipate these questions. So if you want to be really well prepared for your language exam, memorize all those common questions, memorize the follow-up questions, the answers to the follow-up questions as well, and think about how you'd answer them, and also questions that you may have been asked in mocks as well. So all of those, I recommend you really have a good understanding of how to answer them, and you'd be very well prepared for the exam. There are endless numbers of questions you could be asked. I was asked some pretty weird questions. Like someone asked me like, what's the difference between China? So I talked about going back to China to travel, and the examiner asked me, what's the difference in going back to China, a long time ago compared with recently? What changes have you seen in China? And like, that's a pretty hard question to anticipate. So there's definitely less return on effort and time later on, the more questions you prepare. But like, there's no harm in it as well if you have the time, if this is your only 3-4. So overall, memorize those fundamental questions, memorize the likely follow-ups that are coming up, and also past questions that you've been asked in mocks that you didn't anticipate. But then after that, just chill out. You don't need to worry too much about it. Focus on building up the other 3 pillars that I'm going to mention first. And then if you have time, sure, go over some more specific questions as well. Pillar number 2, practice the questions that you're bad at. As you can guess, it's not much of a fan favorite, but it's incredibly important to you doing well. For questions like introducing yourself, once you've practiced them a lot, once you're fluent at it, it feels really good to perform it. But by performing it more, you're not going to get much better because you know it really well already. Whether you get one character slightly mispronounced doesn't really affect your overall grade. What will really help you is the questions that you know you're weak at. This can be different for everyone. You have those objectively hard questions that you can't really predict, but it's also those questions that you personally find difficult. So some examples of this may be, what are the benefits of a co-ed school versus a single sex school? Maybe you found the answer like a bit difficult, a bit too logical to understand, and so you don't perform it as well as your very personal questions about your hobbies and your family. But that's the question that you should be practicing as well to try and lift it up to the same standard as the other questions. Because as with all things, once you're pretty good at a certain answer, by practicing it more, you don't improve that much. But if your answer to a question is really weak with a lot of flaws and not really logical, by making it logical, by fixing the wrong logic that you have in your answer, it improves vastly. And if the examiner asks you that question, whether you prepared for it or not, there's a massive difference between the two. So definitely go over the questions that you're difficult at. Have comfort and confidence in the fact that you have questions you're good at, but it is these weaker questions that you should be working on as well. Just as an anecdote, the area which I had to spend a lot of time on was my detailed study. My general conversation came pretty well to me. I memorized it fairly early on in the year, and I knew I could improvise okay because it's literally just talking about myself. It's talking about things that you would normally talk about in English anyway. So it wasn't too bad. My detailed study, on the other hand, was a bit of a nightmare. I memorized it later, and I just remember just reading it, and I really late at night and just being really frustrated and trying to shove the words into my brain. My detailed study was about an ancient Chinese politician called Sima Guang. And talking about an ancient Chinese politician in English is already pretty hard to memorize and understand, but I had to do it in Chinese, and there were quotes from his pieces that he'd written really long ago in ancient Chinese idiomatic language, and there were also just the language around him as well was quite difficult. But I knew that because of that, I had to devote a lot more time to bring it to a comparable standard to my general conversation. And it paid off in the end. Once you memorize it, it's just the most gratifying feeling, and once you understand the language. But it does take a lot more effort, and you should be willing to devote that extra effort to places where you need it if you're really looking to do well in your language exam. Pillar number 3, practice in high stress situations. This is incredibly important. If you can go into your language oral exam and you can say to yourself that you've been in similarly stressful situations or perhaps even more stressful situations and be able to perform well with your oral, then there's not that much for you to be scared of. But on the other hand, and this is something you can see in like high performance athletes as well, they need to visualize going into the exam firstly to simulate the stress, but they also just participate in like high stakes competitions as well. It's the same for you practicing your oral. If you go into the exam and all you've done is just memorize it at home and practiced it with like a camera or like just randomly with yourself, then the nerves are going to be incredible once you get into that exam because you've never experienced anything like it yet. Whereas if you've practiced in a lot of different situations, then it's a different story altogether. So people you can practice with, your parents. Oftentimes people are a little uncomfortable with their parents, at least. Like you feel like your parents might, attack you like more honestly with your oral. They're good people to practice with if you feel like that's the case. Teachers, some people are a bit intimidated by teachers, but go and practice with them. There are a lot of volunteers, at least for Chinese. We had like volunteers who would help with our Chinese orals as well, and I'd go practice with them as well because they're strangers and people I don't know too well. I've heard instances of people practicing with locals at the news agency or at like food stores as well. But the whole point of this is that you're in different situations. You're in situations you're unused to and you feel nerves and all that. And learning to deal with that plus be able to deliver your oral is how you can really ensure that you can deliver on the day as well. For me personally, two main high stress situations that I was in year 11. The first situation, I just memorized my detailed study. Yes, the one that I said was a nightmare to memorize. Just memorize it, right? Like I kind of knew the questions decently well. And my teacher got me to perform it at parent-teacher interviews at class. So all the parents were there, all the students were there, and then my teacher got me to perform it. One thing she did though was have my back to everyone, so I was just looking at her, but it was still incredibly nerve-wracking because I literally just memorized it. And I feel like to me, that was the most nervous I was for my oral. At the actual exam, I was quite nervous. I was like, oh, it's the actual exam. But then I kind of thought back to that moment and it helped me curve the nerves a little bit. The second anxiety situation that I was put in was at this sort of high performance group. So at our Chinese school, they got some of the high performance kids together to sit a mock. And I had to perform my oral. I think, was it both? I think it was just one part. I forgot if it was, I think it was general convo. Yeah, general convo. I had to perform my general conversation in front of these students. The thing that made this a bit more nerve-wracking was that my teacher didn't tell me until right before. So right before she needed students to showcase the oral. She came up to me. She's like, Darren, would you like to perform your oral in front of these students? And I said, sure. But that was also quite a nervous situation for me. One thing to note though is I remember sitting there and they had 4 examiners. So usually you just say hello to the examiner, but because there were 4 examiners, I acknowledged all 4 of them and everyone sort of laughed a bit at that. And I feel like that just goes to show, how being calm and being able to adapt in a different situation is a really important trait to have. So overall, put yourself in really stressful situations so that the exam doesn't seem so stressful in comparison. And if you performed well in those stress situations and delivered and developed techniques to deal with that stress, then you can go into the exam with that same level of confidence as well. Pillar number 4, the last one. This is one I suggest you can watch before the oral exam if you're looking for something to do and something to, draw confidence from for the oral exam. Of course, if you hate me and dislike all my videos, then don't watch because you'll just be really angry when you go into the exam. But if you can draw some comfort from my videos, then this is a good section of the video to watch. The 4th pillar, and no less important than the other pillars, is to be confident and be yourself going into the exam. If we ignore that content stuff, which is already all done in the months leading up to the oral exam, all the content, all the memorization, all of the technicalities, your oral exam is some 2 examiners, for me at least, it was 2 examiners and you. People in front of people interacting with one another. I'm sure you know what it's like to interact with confident people, with not so confident people, with just different kinds of people in general. And the demeanor you receive of a person, the aura you feel of them, is incredibly important as well. Whether you get one word wrong or not, whether you get one sentence wrong, whether you even mess up an answer because you're just so flustered, is somewhat of a problem. But if you can recover, if you can be confident, if you can be friendly with the examiners, smile, be natural, and just enjoy the interaction with them, that full aura and full effect will be incredibly beneficial for you as well. And it will also help set you at ease because you feel like you're in your element as well. So remember, going into the exam, yes, it's an exam, but it's also just a couple of people talking. And when people talk, you know what an impressive person looks like when they're talking. So try and be that impressive person so that the examiners have a great gist of you as a person. Because even if you mess up a little bit, if they really like you, like the person you are and the way you're acting, then it's going to sort of cover for a lot of those little grammatical errors that you make. So be confident, and if you're watching this actually before your oral exam, good luck to you. Thank you guys for tuning in to today's video. I hope you've enjoyed it. The oral was a really dear part to me because it sort of combined VCE with public speaking. I scored, I think, 92 out of 100 on the oral exam, but I really wanted higher. I think it's because there's a discrepancy in the sort of marking standards, because I'm pretty sure my oral was very good. And in my oral, I shared a lot of personal stories as well. And the detailed study was just a whole journey. The oral, definitely so much effort, and languages are just so much effort in general that looking back, I'm really proud of how I did. And it's a very fond part of my high school journey and VCE journey as well. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. Please try and really cultivate and grow these 4 pillars. And if you can strengthen them well, you will be well prepared, and these will come back to benefit and raise you up in your oral exam. Leave any questions you have in the comments below. Good luck, and I look forward to seeing you all next time.